I don't know how to describe it except to say that, fortunately, we've become very close friends. And in all those years, you know, over 20 years now, I've never spent 30 seconds that were dull.
I was doing my first screen test ever, and Billy Wilder was the director. It was 7 Year Itch, the part eventually played by Tom Ewell with Marilyn Monroe. And I was a very argumentative stage actor. And I argued a great deal with Billy. I kept telling him that I felt rushed. It was awful, and it was a terrible experience. And then I saw the Rushes 2 days later, and it was perfect.
I'll tell you one story about Billy, which I think is typical. About 4 months after we finished the apartment, we were having dinner one night, and sitting at the bar, waiting for our table, Billy said, "Now I know how we should have done the picture." He said, "We should have given Lemon some sort of infirmity, a clubfoot or something, and then he would have been a much more sympathetic character." And I said, "Nonsense. Then he becomes a voyeur, and the whole thing becomes much dirtier." But now by this time the picture is in release, it's a big success, but Billy's still rewriting it in his head and redirecting it a little too.
He's exciting. I think that's maybe one of the greatest qualities about him as a picture maker and as a director. He's so exciting to be with. He gets you up. I don't care what kind of a mood you may be in. Boom.
And many hard issues to be settled. The questions that have brought warfare and bitterness to the Middle East for the last 30 years will not be settled overnight.
I thought a Hollywood director would have a bigger office. Isn't it too small for you?
Well, it's small, but it's gemütlich, as we say. But I do have another room there. Go and look. It's for my secretary. That is, if I can get rid of all that crap there. Hello. Yes, Walter. La meilleure chose. Excuse me, please. It's Mr. Walter Matthau. He tries to tell me in French what he's going to do, and it's going to may take a long time. Continuez, Monsieur Matthau. Very good. That was Walter Matthau. He just made the bed. Are we still running there? Yeah. Okay, good.
What is this bird cage up there?
Well, it's kind of symbolic gesture of my final freedom from the imprisonment in studios, as it were. It's the bird that has escaped the cage, has escaped the Universal Warner's Columbia neighborhood, which I call the Bermuda Triangle. What is your next question?
You were born in Austria, near Vienna, at the beginning of this century?
That's correct, yes. Now, in order to kind of familiarize you with where I come from, you must, because I was born in 1906, and you must think in terms of Austria in those days. It was a huge monarchy of 56 million people, Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Czechoslovakia, parts of Poland, Yugoslavia. And my father, by profession, was an owner of hotels, railroad restaurants, coffee houses, spread through the entire old monarchy, which collapsed in 1918, as we know. And I was born in a small town. I was brought as a kid of 2.5 years old to Vienna. I went there to grammar school, then to high school, what you would call lycée. And the great endeavor of my father was, you know, when you have two sons, one will become a lawyer, the other one will become a doctor. Well, I had a brother. Neither did he become a doctor, nor did I become a lawyer. I became a newspaperman.
Let's do another flashback, further back in time. How was the atmosphere in Vienna? Because it must have been a shock for you to this crumbling empire. I mean, do you have memories of Franz Joseph and
Absolutely. I remember vividly the time during World War I. I was a little boy, but I, like everybody else, I would have to stand in line for sometimes 16, 18, 24 hours just for a couple of potatoes. You know, there was nothing to eat. It was sort of the end of the line. I remember vividly the revolution. I remember the decline of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And I also remember, to go back in time, I remember the Emperor Francis Joseph. I remember vividly a kind of an interesting moment. Emperor Francis Joseph died in 1916. And it was an enormous parade of the heads of other royal houses. A fantastic kind of show. I wish I could direct the thing with that many extras, that many black horses. And there was, in that black thing that was moving slowly down the streets of Vienna, there was a little white, a little boy in white. It was a Hungarian uniform of a Hanbet hussar with a white feather there. And that was Crown Prince Otto. And I envied that boy, my God. He one day will become the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Of course, 2 years later, the whole thing was over and finished. And I remember years later, when I was working at Paramount, somebody came up and said, look, we have a visitor here. It was lunchtime, commissary kind of restaurant. And he is a countryman of yours, and would you like to meet him? And I said, who is it? And they said, that's Crown Prince Otto, this same very man, you know. And I said, sure. So I went to see him, and he was sort of, by this time, a middle-aged man, getting bald. He was here giving lectures at universities. And there I said, that was my dream come true. I finally met the Crown Prince, but he was a Crown Prince no more.
What kind of journalism were you doing? What type of topics were you covering?
I was covering everything, to tell you the truth. I was doing sports, which was mostly football in those days. I was also doing some reportage of a criminal nature. I would do the dirty work. My job would be, for instance, to go to the parents of somebody who was a murderer, who had committed a murder, to ask for a photograph, or to somebody whose family had died in a fire, to ask. A very, very embarrassing thing for me.
Did you meet famous people during your interviews?
Yes, I remember one day, for the Christmas issue, they always had an enquete, one question which they put up to many famous people. And I had to cover some of those. The question then was, and I remember it vividly, was about a new philosophy of politics, something called fascism. And it was a question about Mussolini, and what does one think about Mussolini? And I was sent within one day. Here are the people that I covered in one day. They were Richard Strauss, they were Schnitzler, Freud, and Adler. And Freud, and that was of course the most interesting, and I'm being constantly asked about that little episode, you know, because they are really exploring every single second in his life. I remember that I arrived and I gave my visiting card to the maid. She said, Professor Freud is having lunch. She says, please announce me. And I was there in the salon, I was waiting, and I did see through a crack in the door, I saw the room with the D couch, the famous couch, a very small couch, tiny, with a Turkish carpet kind of flung over it. And pretty soon, Freud came out from the dining room with the napkin still around his neck, and he was kind of staring at that thing, and he says, are you Herr Wilder? And I said, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, you're with this and this newspaper? And he says, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, there's the door, and he threw me out because he loathed newspapermen.
I have the feeling, talking with people of your generation and coming from Vienna and of Jewish origin, that maybe because of the anti-Semitism, there was not a love story between you and your native city, that people of Vienna preferred Berlin. Am I right?
Well, it depends, you see. The younger ones, naturally, they preferred Berlin because that was the vibrant, modern city, especially the period where I lived there between 1927 and 1933. Those were 1926. They were the 7 great years, of Bert Brecht and of Schoenberg and of the Bauhaus, and things were happening.
In those days, life was tough in Berlin. To survive, were you doing only journalism?
Well, we were young, and jazz came up, and people started dancing the Charleston and God knows what. And I was one of those, and since I was kind of a fairly good dancer, and since times were tough, I did a stint as what you would now laughingly call a gigolo, kind of a dancer for money in a hotel, the Eden Hotel in Berlin. But actually, no, it was not quite as romantic as it sounds. Actually, I did it in order to write a series of articles on what it is to be a gigolo in Berlin. And it sort of made a bit of a scandal.
I heard that you wrote dozens of scripts in Berlin. The most famous was People on Sunday, a forerunner of neorealism.
Yeah, it was my first picture as a scenario, silent, mind you. One of the last of the silent pictures was 28, 29, and Robert Siodmak was the director. But it kind of gave me a foothold. I sort of started to become a professional scriptwriter, and I wrote many of the things there for UFA and other companies.
Did you feel already the lure of America in Berlin?
Naturally, everybody wanted to go to Hollywood, but it was the advent of Mr. Hitler that made us go into exile, which ultimately would lead many of us to Hollywood. When it became apparent that Hitler was going to take over and what his politics are, and that it's going to be impossible for any of us to work, the exodus started. Some, afraid that they could not speak any other language but German, went to Prague, some went to Vienna, but they were just fooling themselves because Hitler followed them and took over those countries very quickly. I myself, I went to Paris, and I spent about a year there in Paris, made one picture with Daniel Darieux, who was very, very young then, called Mauvaise Graine.
Was it a comedy?
No, it was a serious picture, kind of cinema verité, as you call it, about young, kind of Vitelloni type kids who are stealing automobiles.
Then you went to the US to write scripts.
I went there and I never came back.
How did you manage to stay and work there?
You know, when you are a writer, when you are deprived of your language, you know, you're more or less you're dead. So I then just had to sit down and start studying English. I went to night school. I had I searched for very handsome young ladies who only spoke English. That is a great help. I listened to the radio. I kind of tried to make a living by writing stories in German, which were translated, and I sold a couple here and made a few $1,000s. And ultimately, I sold one of those to Paramount, and they gave me a little bit of a contract there. In those days, I'm talking now about 1934, all studios had a huge amount of writers under contract. We had to deliver, like, I think it was 11 pages every Thursday. We had to hand in 11 pages of script. And you were assigned to pictures, and you wrote 2, 3, 4 pictures. You were taken off pictures. You were rewriting pictures. It was like a great big assembly line, a factory. And the lucky break we got was that the head of the writers department, he had an idea of teaming me up with Charles Brackett, a novelist, very learned and elegant man. And he took us to see Lubitsch, who was making 2 pictures at the time. He was looking for people who could write a script on Bluebeard's His Wife, and that's the way we started. Subsequently, we stayed with Lubitsch for Ninotchka.
I think working for Lubitsch was a very important step to improve your craft.
Absolutely, enormously.
Did you feel like many writers working in Hollywood at that time that the system was very constricting?
Yeah, it was constricting, except that if you made a name for yourself, it was beginning to become an honorable profession, which it was then not, because people came to Hollywood, to make quick money. Writers from New York, stage actors, novelists, Scott Fitzgerald, whom I knew at Paramount, by the way, Faulkner. They would all kind of put their fingers in the pie, but not with any genuine interest. They kind of looked down on movies, which, is my delight, because everybody has been looking down on movies, as something kind of third rate, up until, thank God, the invention of television. Now we have something to look down on.
Ball of Fire, directed by Howard Hawks, was your last script before becoming a filmmaker.
Yeah, I wanted to direct. In fact, I spent all of my time on the set with Hawks and watched him during the shooting. I didn't take any salary. I just took a little learning vacation.
You wanted to go
direct.
into directing because you feel your scripts were betrayed, or you wanted to have more control?
I wanted to have more control, and I just thought that directing was all the fun. Writing is misery, writing is sweat, writing is hard labor. The fun is to be on the set if you have a good script and capable, or if you're lucky enough to have outstanding actors. That's real fun, That's the thing to do.
You mean the writing is the toughest part of the filmmaking?
Well,
it's too much to do the toughest part, and somebody else does the holiday.
It's like making the bed for somebody, and then he hops into the bed, and I go home, I remember at one time we had written a script for Mitchell Eisen and Arthur Hornblow, the producer, called Hold Back the Dawn, with Boyer and with Olivia de Havilland and Paulette Goddard and a slew of other actors. And the basic point of the script was, of the story, of the theme was, the Romanian gigolo who would like to get into the United States but doesn't have a visa. So he's now waiting for the quota number to come up in some lousy hotel in Tijuana across the border. And he was lying there on the couch, unshaven and disheveled, and there was a cockroach. I'm quoting the script now. A cockroach was trying to kind of climb up the dirty wall and onto a little mirror that was there. And he had a little walking stick there or something, and he would stop that cockroach anytime he wanted to get onto the mirror and say, "Wait a minute, where are you going? Have you got a visa?" That was basically the scene. So I remember there was a restaurant across the street called Lucy's, and we went to lunch there, Brackett and I. And I ran into Boyer, and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, we're doing this scene in the hotel." He says, "Oh, yes, that scene with the cockroach, it's a good scene, isn't it?" And Boyer said, "Yes, sir. You think it's a good scene?" He says, "We cut it out because I refuse to do it." I said, "Why?" And Boyer said, "Well, it's stupid, it's idiotic." He says, "Why should I talk to a cockroach if a cockroach cannot answer me? I'm not going to talk to a cockroach." And I looked at Brackett, Brackett looked at me, and we got very, very angry, and we went back to the office, and we were still writing the final 20 minutes of that film. And I was so angry, I said, I tell you, this son of a bitch, if he doesn't talk to a cockroach, he won't talk to anybody." And we gave him the absolute minimum for the end. We gave everything to Olivia de Havilland out of anger, Now, what had happened was, that at this time, Paramount was making like 40, 45 pictures a year. They said, "Well, we like Brackett and Wilder as a team. We don't want to lose them. If that silly guy wants to break his neck, how good can it be?" And they let me direct my very first picture. But I knew what they were thinking. So I found a story that was absolutely kind of foolproof. It was The Major and the Minor with Ginger Rogers. And we got Milan, with whom I worked subsequently. And I made a small, very successful picture. It was a rather mild, chaste version of Lolita. That's what it was. That 24-year-old girl doesn't have enough money to get back on the train, but has enough money for a child's ticket, which is half price, and disguises herself as a child and runs into Ray Milland, who finds himself curiously sexually attracted by not knowing, and it disturbs him greatly. Since that was a success, they gave me contact, and I stayed on as a director.
But you were not really satisfied with the system because you wanted to achieve more control. You switched from scriptwriter to director and then director to producer, producer-director.
And that is the level of the producer who, I'm not talking now about great producers like the Thorbergs and the Selznicks and the Goldwins. I'm talking about a studio producer who, you know, since they cannot write, since they cannot direct, since they cannot act, since they cannot compose, they become the head of everything. And that was the ultimate control. So it was a question of, not of power, but of ultimately having it as close to, on the screen, to what you first imagined, to have it as close to that after the execution.
Ace in the Hole was your first film as a producer?
And believe me, it was a very, very harsh experience. I almost left Paramount because that was before I had the controls, the cutting control and other controls. They just retitled the picture. You know, it was Ace in the Hole. They called it The Big Carnival to recoup some money. Then it was a success in Europe. But I learned my lesson. You know, I insisted on certain things. You know, so they cannot go behind my back and suddenly the picture is retitled, it is recut, it is redubbed, rescored, you know. That is very important. But however, being a very fast shooter of pictures, a picture maker, and not indulging in kind of masturbatory self-exercises of egocentric self-satisfaction, you know. I ultimately achieved the cutting rights from the studio, which is about the best that you can hope for.
Walks about 5% of the time, but just strikes out 5% of the time.
Come on, Dodgers, hurt him!
Three and
Christ's
2.
sake, come on!
Dodger runners will be off on the pitch with 2 out. Ferguson, Sutton, and Lopes out there.
Over there is the airport, and this is where 20th Century Fox used to be. And this is the beach. This is where our house is, way out there. Now, how about the drink? Let's go inside, huh? There's a little kind of catapult and stuff, Roman things, and my little Japanese dwarf trees. Come with me now, please. All right, now let's see. Here we have a couple of Picassos, and then we have a Javlensky, and a Vuillard, and a Braque, and a Chagall, and a portrait of Kandinsky by Gabriel Munter, another Javlensky. Then we have here the 2 nudes by Kirchner. Then we have another nude by Suzanne Valadon, a Dufy Promenade des Anglais, a blue Picasso, a watercolor by Renoir, another Picasso, and way in the corner there we have a Giacometti. And naturally in back of it, you know, other paintings where I don't even know where to hang them yet.
When did you start collecting all those paintings?
Oh, about 50 years ago, way back in Berlin. And I don't even consider myself a collector. I consider myself an accumulator. I have accumulated things, like a pack rat, you know. I cannot help myself. I just have that sickness. I've got to buy and acquire, and I've got too much stuff, and I've got it hidden under the beds and in closets and in warehouses. I just cannot stop buying.
What does it correspond to?
I don't know, greed, if you want to call it, or curiosity, or passion, but it is not an eclectic kind of, or let us say, not a Catholic kind of a collection. I also collect Japanese dwarf trees and glass paperweights and Chinese jar. You just name it, I collect it.
But what is striking is that you tend to like extremely avant-garde or abstract painting. And we know that in matters of films, you are a classic.
I don't think there's a contradiction. I really think that I am an adventurer myself. I do not mind progress. I do not mind something totally new, something revolutionary, if it makes sense and if it belongs. What I hate is what I would call the phony innovator, who to begin with is not an innovator at all, because they have done everything before in Russia and at the old UFA company in Berlin, you know. There's nothing really new. But people who kind of do crazy stuff in order to astonish the middle-class man, épater les bourgeois. I don't subscribe to that whatsoever.
And yet, yourself, you shocked film people with The Lost Weekend by showing the drama of an alcoholic. At that time, they used to make light comedies on the subject. And in Ace in the Hole, you expose the methods of the yellow journalist who lets a man die for a scoop. And also, later, in Some Like It Hot...
On Some Like It Hot, I had no difficulties whatsoever. There was some super sensitive critics, some, not many, who said Mr. Wilder finds it necessary to find comedy in transvestitism, having men dressed as women, or he digs deep into the old Charlie's Aunt cliche and so. But as far as the studio is concerned, I had no difficulties whatsoever.
The vital thing was how Tony Curtis and I would look in the makeup when we were spending, as I mentioned earlier, 85% of the film, you know, dressed as girls and running around in drag. How the wigs would look and how the makeup would look. Would it be believable? That being crucial, we spent, almost a week every day going through a series of makeup tests and different sized lips with the lipstick and different wigs, and we were going crazy. When we got, Tony and I, what we thought were the right makeups, Billy said, okay, he says, now, we were on the Samuel Goldwyn lot where we shot. He says, go to the ladies' room. And we said, what? He said, you go to the ladies' room. They're going to find out whether this works or not. He says, go to the ladies' room. So in we went. Boy, the flop sweat was flying. I was scared to death. I felt so embarrassed. But in we went. All the women going in and out accepted us. They just thought that we were extras or bit players doing a film, a period piece in which we would be dressed in these costumes. They thought we were women. And we came back and said to Billy, not one woman batted an eyeball. He said, that's it. Don't change anything. That's the way you're going to look.
After the war, or just at the end of the war, you were one of the first directors in Hollywood who decided to shoot on location, to go into the streets for Lost Weekend, Double Indemnity, and later Sunset Boulevard. Why was this?
Last weekend, I wanted to catch the atmosphere of New York. I needed 3rd Avenue. At that time, there was still an elevator going up above. I needed that. It needed long, vast vistas of New York, of skyscrapers, of when he's going up 3rd Avenue, trying to pawn the typewriter because he needs money for some more booze. Personally, just between you and me, I much rather shoot inside a studio because I can control it. I don't have to fight the light, which is going all the time, the weather. The sun is going all the time. Or it starts raining, and then you reshoot and then the sun comes out again. You have no control, and you compromise. I'm embarrassed, to tell you the truth, and so are many actors, about shooting in front of a lot of people. I'll tell you a good story about it. Just care for another drink? Okay. Now, this is what happened. We were shooting 7 Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe, and do you remember that famous shot? Do you remember the wind that is lifting her skirt? Well, we were all set up to shoot that thing, on 59th and Madison, something like it. I had, in order to make sure that the skirt is being lifted, not only that there were 5 and ultimately 10,000 people, there were there were the electricians and the mechanics who were working the fan down below so that it would work, right? They accepted big bribes of people around. They all wanted to be underneath there and look up Marilyn's skirt. And we did it, and it never quite worked, and people were heckling from the sidelines, and people were running up for autographs, and it was very embarrassing, I tell you. And Joe DiMaggio, who was at that time the husband of Marilyn's, he was watching it, and he didn't like it very much. his wife making a spectacle of herself. And I didn't like the lack of control. I couldn't really get it right. And finally, ultimately, we did that shot in the studio. It was perfect.
But when you shoot in studio, then you ask, for instance, Alexander Trauner to be as precise, as almost as documentary as
but you
possible.
see,
In Irma la Douce, you believe you are in Les Halles.
Absolutely. But you see, the beauty of working with Trauner is, who I consider him, of course, the greatest art director. He was working on Les Enfants du Paradis and then the Quai de Brume and all the great pictures. He's the absolute master of the perspective. In other words, when I shot the scene in the apartment with the 5,000 desks, everybody asked me, where did you find that office? You were in New York, huh? Where were you? What building was it? Was it the Rockefeller Center? Was it the new Seagram building? It was on stage 5 at Goldwyn's. But Trauner does something which is unique, and he's the master of the perspective. By that I mean he had 100 desks. Then he had another 200 desks, but in a smaller size, and we had extras who were smaller. Ultimately, they were tiny desks, and they were dwarf extras. And ultimately, at the very end, they were cutouts. They were desks that were about as large as this ashtray, except without the ashes naturally. Tiny little desks and cutouts, you know. And in back of it, you know, you saw little traffic. Things were happening, you know, on strings, you know. He just gave you the illusion. That's when picture making becomes a real fun, you know, that you do it with mirrors. You do it like a magician, you know. You pull rabbits out of hats.
I would like to know the way you develop your script. How does it start? How do you get your ideas, and which stages you go through?
Well, you carry ideas with you all along, you know. You've got them somewhere in the back of your mind, in the drawers of your desk. Let's take, for instance, say, the apartment. Now, I remember many, many years ago, I saw a beautiful picture by David Lean called Brief Encounter. It was the love affair between a married woman and a man, and in order to have their rendezvous of love, they used the apartment of a friend of this guy. That's where they met. Of course, they could not be seen. They could not go to a hotel or anything like that. And I always thought that the guy whose apartment they used was an interesting character. And I kept that in the back of my mind. I thought that would be a wonderful character by himself, touching and funny at certain moments. And years later, after we had finished Some Like It Hot, I wanted to make another picture with Lemon. And I thought that would be the perfect cast for this character. But that's all I had, was just that one character and the theme of a man who is being exploited, or lets himself be exploited. A man who, upon coming home in the evening, crawls into, also he is lonely and a bachelor, crawls into a bed still warm from the lovers who had been there before.
Where are we exactly here? Is it Malibu?
It's part of Malibu. It's called Trancas. We spend about every weekend here, especially in the summer, just to recover from what I suffered through.
Yesterday we were talking about the way you get your script ideas. And what is your working procedure?
Yeah, to quote Mr. Churchill, it's blood, sweat, and tears, believe me. It is a drag. It is hard work. And it's not one of those kind of things people imagine that muses come and they kiss your brow and there you are, kind of the poet in the clouds. Nothing like it. We just sort of, that's Iz and I, you know, when we collaborate, we We get to the office like at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, like employees of a bank. And we sit there and we try to find something. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes we just sit there and wait. Say, how would it be if the husband... I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
And sometimes the muse does come and kiss your brows, and we just go at it, and we write like 10, 12 pages a day.
When you write a script, do you have an actor in mind?
Most of the time. Certainly we know who the lead is going to be. When you prepare witness for the prosecution, you must know that Lawton is going to play the lawyer, and you write in a different way, knowing that it's going to be Lawton, and that Marlene Dietrich is going to be the wife of the Taipao. We knew that. When we did Some Like It Hot, we started with Lemon and Curtis, and we were hoping for Marilyn Monroe. We were not sure, but thank God we did get her.
Now, I can't do Billy's accent, but anyway, all I know is that this crazy man sat down and he says, now look, he says, I've got this script here, and it concerns the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and you are a musician, and the other fellow there with you is a musician, and you witnessed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and what you got to do is you got to dress up and join an all-girl orchestra, because now they know that you've seen it, and they may come, and they're going to kill you, and so for 85% of the picture, you're going to run around in drag, kid. You want to do it? And for some insane reason, I said yes.
And on the set, how do you work with them? Do you give them a lot of free rein? Of course, it must be different with different actors.
Absolutely. It's very, very difficult to make a set rule, you know. You treat every actor the same way. You know? It's like, you know, like a psychiatrist having various patients of different illnesses on the couch. And you have to be all kinds of things, not just a psychiatrist to them. You have to be a masochist. You have to be an SS man. You have to be a father confessor priest. You have to cuddle them. You have to be sweet to them, be very severe with them. It just depends, you know. They're all, thank God, they're all human beings with different problems.
You like to direct a great number of actors, but it seems that among them, 3 stand out. Walter Matthau, with whom you directed in 3 films, Jack Lemmon in 6 films, and William Holden in 3 films. And they seem to represent 3 different aspects of man, of personality. How do you see them?
It just depends on the picture. You know, if it's a picture about a likable, attractive Schlemiel, naturally, that's Lemmon. If it is a strong, very American, straight-faced businessman, that's Holden. And if I need a funny, slightly devious, kind of everybody's brother-in-law, you take Matthau. You couldn't do better, you know. Those are highly original characters where it does not take an hour to establish their character. It's like putting on an old pair of slippers, if you know what I mean.
You see, Billy Wilder sees me as, and I'm quoting, as a lovable rogue, a scalawag, a con man, a deceiver, and one who should never, in any case, under any circumstances, play the love interest. Now, I disagree with him. But you see, with a director, you can't tell a director, hey, listen, I'm a love interest type. I mean, women go crazy about me. They see in me a large English sheepdog, you know. and they want to grab my body and pet it and play around with me and so forth. He doesn't see that. Billy Wilder doesn't see me as a sex symbol. And all my life, I've been miserable because I always wanted women to jump on me the way they jump on pretty men like Jack Lemmon, you know.
Somehow you had to deal in your career with two myths, Humphrey Bogart and Marilyn Monroe, which are the opposite of Matthau and Lemmon, who are much more everyday personalities. I think you had some problems with the two of them.
Well, I had problems with Bogart at the beginning of the shooting of Sabrina, because he was not my first choice. My first choice was Cary Grant, but I just couldn't get him. We were sure up until 4 weeks before we started that it's going to be. But he kind of never thought that he was part of what you may call kind of the Wilder clique, people who kind of meet, you know, after shooting and have a cocktail or two. He had difficulties with the part. It was not natural to him, you know. There was nothing tough. There were no guns, there was no suspense, and there was not that mystique of Rick in Casablanca. Monroe was a whole different story, because Monroe, I had no problem with Monroe. Monroe had problems with Monroe. She had problems with herself. She was slightly discombobulated at all times. She had great difficulties to concentrate. Something was always biting her, eating her. And it was like pulling teeth, you know. But by God, you know, when you were through with her, when you suffered through that thing, through the 30, 40, 50 takes sometimes, or through her lateness, you had something there, you know, something absolutely unique that cannot be duplicated. And you forget after the picture is finished and you had a rough time before. Not that she was mean or anything like that. She would have mental blocks. She really required the greatest of the analysts, or a slew of analysts, not just one, you know, to unravel what was happening within her.
I've never seen him stopped cold, except by Marilyn. We were doing a scene, and all she had to do, when Tony and I were, the camera was on us, she knocks on the door. We quickly throw our wigs on, because we were still disguising ourselves as girls, and say, "Come in." Tony says, "Come in." She walks in, the camera now is on her. All she says is, "Where is the bourbon?" Opens a drawer and says, "Oh, there it is."
There was another myth that you met in Berlin before she became a myth. It's Marlene Dietrich, and
Yeah.
you used her later as an actress.
Yeah, we made two pictures together. She was the exact opposite of what she represented on the screen. You know, when you saw her in Shanghai Express, when you saw her in Blue Angel, when you know, there was that seductive
Aura.
vamp. So she is really a German Hausfrau, you know, and that's what she likes the best. She likes to scrub the floors and scramble your eggs, and yeah, she is a great friend of mine, and we kind of always used to laugh about the kind of thing they made out of her. Nothing like it.
When you went to shoot, for instance, after the war, Foreign Affair, how was Berlin, you know, since you had left it 15 years before?
Oh, it was a totally different world. But I had been in Berlin long before that. In 1945, I came to Berlin when I was with the army. It was fascinating, I tell you, to leave afraid for my life and then come back, you know, as one of the conquerors, as it were.
When you shoot, when you make a film, you throw old taboos, old totems, you don't respect, you show things as they are. I mean, for instance, Kiss Me Stupid, that's a very important thing because you raised the hell in America. What was, you know?
Well, I raised hell, you know. I don't want to give you the feeling that I'm such a rebel against the establishment. Not at all. The trouble with Kiss Me Stupid, which actually was a very chaste picture, was about a man who is caught. It is that eternal drama between duty and desire. He's a songwriter. He wants to sell a song to a popular singer. On the other hand, the singer wants to have an affair with the wife of the composer, and he does a substitution. Not only that he did not permit his wife to have an affair with the thing, he substituted her with the prostitute, and then he protected even the prostitute. It was really a very innocent picture. The problem there was, usually I don't talk in those terms, was that I really was ahead of my time. It was just before we started liberalizing our code of ethics, when censorship was just running amok. Cheers.
But nevertheless, you showed in Kiss Me Stupid that the housewife liked to be a prostitute for one night, and the prostitute enjoyed to be a housewife.
Well, that you kind of you are sort of making a kind of a parallel sort of a thing, which makes which makes you such a good newspaper man. It never occurred to the wife to become a prostitute for one night. She was crazy about that particular singer, Dean Martin. She wouldn't have minded to have had an affair with him, but not really a prostitute. And the prostitute, played by Kim Novak, she was a nice girl. Nothing wrong with her.
You also broke political taboos. When you made Ninochka, you were far in advance of its time. It was when you wrote Ninochka, it was a lightweight comedy, but it told everything about the trials and the purges in Russia. And 30 years later, you did 1, 2, 3, 25 years later, which was a film about anticipating the whole Russian-American connections, business connections.
Coca-Cola.
1, 2, 3 rose a hell too. I mean, it was attacked by both left and right.
Isn't that nice? I love it, to irritate everybody. Ultimately, naturally, they're going to put me against this cellophane wall and shoot me from both sides. The communists, the capitalists. I love it.
Why did 1, 2, 3 raise such a hell?
It did not. 1, 2, 3 didn't raise any hell. Didn't raise enough hell. If it raised a lot of clamor, it would have been a bigger box office hit. No, the trouble was that on 1, 2, 3, the trouble was that while we were shooting the picture, which played West Berlin, East Berlin, and the endeavor of the Coca-Cola colonialism, it was a comedy. Everything seemed to be easy and fun and gay, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the film, while we were working, trouble started. There were too many people from East Germany escaping into West Berlin and West Germany, and they closed the border. They put the wall up, and it ceased to be a comedy setup anymore. And the picture was not what we expected it to be.
But it seems that for you, the Russian people have not today. I mean, the communists have not a great sense of humor. Don't you feel attracted by trying to tease them a little?
Well, maybe I'm very primitive, but gaiety, is not their forte. I guess they have clowns in their circuses. They have dancing bears. They have kangaroos who play soccer, and people are screaming with laughter. But that's not my idea of having a sense of humor. And I will tell you one little anecdote about a Russian sense of humor. We were in Berlin and we were shooting 1, 2, 3, and they invited us to the East German film club called Die Möwe, the Seagull. We went there, and they had just run their apartment, and they said it was marvelous, it was wonderful, and it really showed up the depravity of the capitalist system, how a man can further his career by filthy tricks, by giving away the key to his apartment. And they said, very typical of America, typical of New York. And I told them, look, a story like this could happen any place. It could happen not just in New York, it could happen in Stockholm, it could happen in Buenos Aires, It could happen in Tokyo. It certainly could not happen in Moscow, I must admit to that. And they were very, very pleased, you know, that it could not happen in Moscow. And then I told them why. I said it could not happen in Moscow because nobody can give you the key to your apartment so you can make love to a lady. Because if he gave you the key to the apartment, there are still 6 more families living in the same apartment. That did not amuse them very much. You ran out of questions, huh? Just as well.
Almost 30 years after Sunset Boulevard, you made Fedora, and of course, there are echoes of the first film in Fedora.
By echoes, you mean echoes. You know, both of us have a nice little accent. Well, all I can tell you is, Michel, if it's an echo of Sunset Boulevard, I'm very proud. And I think it was very smart to try and make a picture with echoes of a very successful picture of mine. The stupid thing would have been if I would have repeated on a failure of mine. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I also think that you are very far from Norma Desmond and Fedora because you don't live in a dream, you look for reality. And I think Sherlock Holmes is very close to you. I mean, he's a collector, he's an inquirer, he's a man who wants to look for the truth.
Yes, he is also a dope addict, and he is also, in some versions, maybe homosexually inclined, having something to do with Dr. Watson. But he's bright, he's smart, he is enigmatic, and I'll buy that. It's fine. You think I'm Sherlock Holmes? Okay.
And he's a rational man who is afraid of giving way to too much emotion or too much passion.
You don't think I'm emotional or passionate? Do you want me to mention some names? You want to ask some people?
Well, I think in a way that your later films, like precisely Sherlock Holmes and Avanti, have a more mellow mood and more romanticism.
Don't say that. That scares me. I must stop that. I don't want to be known as that. I want to be known as a cynic, as somebody with a vitriolic tongue. I like that much better. I don't want to be known as a softie. Please.
We won't keep that.
No, no, no. Just we keep it, but we keep it between us, a secret, okay?
You like to switch all the time. I mean, there's a Wilder touch, but not a Wilder specialty. You go from drama to comedy, from farce to suspense.
That's correct, yes.
You're unlike other directors in that respect.
Yeah, well, I have done every kind of picture except a Western. However, I think that the wise man is Hitchcock, you know, who's known for his suspense pictures. He does a certain kind of a picture, does it beautifully, and people know what to expect. But it would sort of, it would bother me. It would bother me I would find it boring, you know, to do always the same kind of a picture. I try to switch styles. When I'm very, very sad, I'd like to make a comedy. And when I'm in a very happy mood, I'd like to make a very heavy drama.
But you are a serious director. I mean, you have...
You're very kind, Michel, but just between the two of us, you know, I don't think that making movies is my entire life. Now, if there's one thing, you know, that I hate more than not being taken seriously is to be taken too seriously. When you say that I'm searching for truth, and so and so, you French sure know how to flatter somebody. I'm just trying to make a living. Get 2 hours of film, and I don't really give a shit whether how true it is, how great it is. Just get it over with. Print that.